I'm always hesitant going into a movie about a dog. We've had way too many examples of stories that end with the canine companion not making it to the final scene. So now we've got the simply named story Dog, who's starring and then co-directed by Channing Tatum. Is it worth the watch? And then more importantly, does the dog die? Two former Army Rangers have their wills and patience tested as they race down the Pacific coast in hopes of making it to a fellow soldier's funeral on time. Along the way, they'll drive each other completely crazy, break a small handful of laws, narrowly evade death, and learn to let down their guards in order to have a fighting chance of finding happiness. So like I mentioned, this stars Channing Tatum and a Belgian Malinois, I think that's how you pronounce it, and that's a dog named Lulu. At least that's what her name is in the movie. Now think of this as kind of your standard buddy road trip movie, except one of the buddies is a dog, and they're not really buddies at all. We learn almost from the very beginning that Tatum and Lulu both suffer from a lot of PTSD from their time as Army Rangers. They've experienced a lot of trauma, and both are damaged in ways that makes it difficult for them to get along with everybody else. Tatum wants to get into private security contract work overseas with, a company that's sort of like Blackwater, but because of his medical history, he's having some difficulties securing his spot. He needs his former commanding officer to vouch for him, so in a sort of exchange, Tatum's Briggs has to take Lulu to the funeral of her handler, and then the CO will sign off on Briggs. There's very little lead up to all of this, which I think works fine because we get the right amount of background on each of the main characters pretty quickly, and then we don't need to know much else about their background for what is going to transpire in the story. The arc is fairly predictable, which didn't bother me. It's pretty obvious that we're going to follow the duo as they travel, both not getting along and experiencing unfortunate and then sometimes funny mishaps. And then after multiple sequences of difficulties, they're going to soften to each other and form a bond. The catch here is that after the funeral, Briggs is supposed to take Lulu to a military base where she's going to be put down. And yet that's not what I want to experience in a movie. So it's always looming in the background that this has the potential to end terribly. I like the dynamic between Tatum and the dog. Tatum, for a lot of the movie, is only interacting with Lulu, so he has to carry a lot of the emotion and the feeling. And Lulu does a great job of being adorable and cute, even though she really could eat your face off. She's an expressive dog, and I think she steals a lot of the scenes. I had mentioned that Tatum co-directed this, and it's his first time directing, but he's paired up with another first-time director, and just sometimes that lack of experience becomes evident. There are several sequences at the beginning of the film where the acting is stiff and stunted. The dialogue exchanges don't come across as natural, and it feels like they should have gone with another take to just loosen up a bit and not feel like they were just delivering lines of a script, but instead actually having a conversation. The story also sits in certain situations longer than is necessary or really effective, but then chooses to shorten others that could have been more impactful. Most of the time this is balanced well, but for a 90-minute movie, it came across as uneven at times. And I wanted less of Tatum in a bar hitting up women and more time spent with Ethan Suplee having some subtly profound conversations. I like the humor in this for the most part. Most of it's not in your face and not hilarious, but portions made me chuckle and at the very least caused a huge smile on my face. Now, sometimes this was surrounding Lulu's behavior, and other times it was just Tatum's exasperated and muttered lines that felt very relatable in his frustration. There's this one sequence with Tatum and Kevin Nash that I thought was really cute and charming. Here you have two bulking guys who could be pretty intimidating, and yet they were all soft and cuddly thanks to just some herbal refreshment. And the tone of the scene really felt well with the rest of the story, and it provided a good emotional shift for the story and then our characters' relationships. The scenery lends itself to just some beautiful cinematography. We get awesome views of mountainous landscapes and then wide shots of the coast. And a lot of the time, the scenes are also going to be right around sunset, where this warm glow causes a softness and a peace to come over the scene. And because a large portion of the trip is along the Pacific coast, I recognize and am familiar with a lot of the scenery just because of where I live. So there were a few portions where time seemed to skip ahead in odd ways compared to the distance that they would have had to have traveled. It's minor, but it is noticeable. I really enjoyed the focus within the story on mental health and healing. We get several times that this is addressed in different ways, but it never felt preachy. The way it was handled every time, it wasn't with shame or condemnation, but really with care and compassion, which I thought was powerful. Now, even though this is mostly a comedy, just dealing with the topics of PTSD, death, and loss, there are bound to be some emotional moments. And there's one spot in particular where Lulu does just one simple action, and my eyes were instantly filled with tears. And after the screening, as I was talking with my son who went with me, he teared up at the exact moment also. We just don't deserve dogs at all. They're just such great companions, and I think this scene was just another illustration of how loyal and loving they can be. So at the end of this, Dog is a charming and sweet buddy road trip story where the two start off as rough and hard to sympathize with, but by the end, their progressions, both individual and together, are charismatic, touching, and then hopeful. Channing Tatum is a wonderful, soft, tough guy with plenty of scars, both inside and out, who discovers a companion working through a lot of the same issues. I think the humor works well without being distracting, and the drama is effective and emotional without leaving us in the bell jar. And while portions of the story could be adjusted to make the tone more even and some of the acting and dialogue redirected to feel more natural, this was an inspiring and uplifting story of friendship and then healing. There's no sex or nudity, a lot of profanity, and some violence. I give Dog 4 out of 5 couches. Do you have a favorite dog movie? I'd love to know what it is in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me. Oh, I forgot to tell you whether or not the dog dies. So at the end, that would have been super rude to end like that after promising to say. Okay, so I'm happy to report that Lulu does survive, making for a very happy and touching ending.